Good morning, everyone, and thank you for this slot in your General Assembly to the European Audiovisual Observatory, which I'm very happy to present with this video clip from Strasbourg on a very sunny day, thinking of you next Sunday. I've been asked by Pauline Durand-Vial to give you a little insight into the most recent changes that have been adopted to the Audiovisual Media Services Directive with regard to the core of your works, which means what's in for European works. So what I will try to do today is to give you a little insight into the set of rules that exist at EU level for European works. And then I will go into the milestone, the cornerstone of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which is the country of origin, and to see if there are some cracks that are about to be introduced with regards to European works. With the help of my colleagues from the market department, I will show you some developments from the market side to see, and this will maybe be more a question for your debate, if this legal response is adequate with regard to the market developments, and then very briefly a reminder about the next deadlines for next steps. So to start with the regulatory frameworks, you will see from this image that the AVMS directive is not alone. It's in good company. We have the portability regulation, corporate package, SATCAB, data protection rules, e-commerce, you name it. The battery is quite full. And this is not an anomaly. This is because in the 2010 structure, the idea was very binary. On the one side, you had audiovisual media services, which were broadcasting VOD, and on the other side you had all the rest, so the internet companies that were underlying the e-commerce directive. With the changes that were introduced last year with the 2018 directive revised, the situation changes. Everything goes under one umbrella and to a certain extent, and we will see that some of the rules that have been so far applicable only to AVMS services will now also be extended to video sharing platforms. This is basically what you see here now on the screen is the infographic of the European Commission to tell in a nutshell what the AVMS revised is about. You will see that European works, they have gained a quite central place in this little graphic. It's not alone. You will see that there are also mentioned rules concerning the scope, so extension to video sharing platforms with regard to protection of minors, hate speech, commercial communications. I will not go into this here because this is not the main purpose of why you've invited me here to give you this little talk. But just to put things into context, I will cherry pick from here country of origin and European works. Country of origin is crucial because it is still mentioned as the cornerstone of the directive. This means that the cornerstone stays. Country of origin is the main rule of the AVMS directive as part of the internal market. And there are new rules in order to establish which is the competent member states. Nevertheless, there is a little crack in the system, because with regard to European works, we will see that there are now possibilities for member states to act as member states of destination for the targeting services. And this is a quite new phenomenon that has also led certain critics to doubt that Europe still exists. So it's absolutely important to take this into account. There are also measures for transparency, where the observatory will be involved with regard to the Mavisa database, which will help all of you to find out who is competent over what. But again, this we leave it a bit on the side to go to the core of our rules. European works, our articles of reference are 16, 17 and 13. 16, 17, just for memory, are those applicable to linear services. They remain unchanged. In a nutshell, broadcasters have to reserve at least 50% of their transmission time to European works, and they have an option of reserving 10% of the transmission time or of their programming budget to independent European works. These were the rules in 2010. These are still the rules, unchanged after the revision of last year. Things are not the same for VOD services. This is Article 13. This is the one that has been probably one of the most worked with, and which also shows in the formulation, which is not always crystal clear. But again, to recap, 2010 situation, there was a choice between among three different kinds of tools that member state could put in place. Either financial contribution or share in the catalog or prominence obligations. These were all on the or basis. Now we have an and. We have the minimum share in the catalog, which is quantified into 30%, and prominence obligation. There is still one or, which is the financial contribution. If this is introduced, member states can, and here we have the crack to the country of origin principle, they can choose to extend these rules also to the targeting services, with some exemptions for the smallest ones, so those with the low turnover or of a low budget. So this is the state of the art for the next round of implementation, but let's see what has happened so far at national level, because some initiatives have already taken place, and I will show you the main findings of our mapping that has been commissioned by the efforts last year, and which shows the picture end of 2018 with regard to the 2010 directive. Let's start with the linear services. You will see from the map that you have on the screen now that almost all European member states, they have decided to stick to the formulation of the directive, that is 50%. There are just a few exceptions with 60%, but you see clearly that the map is quite homogeneous. If you move over to the other provision, the Article 17, so the one concerning independent European works, where there was the option of financial contribution or the transmission time, you will see that Europe is quite split in two. There are some countries that have chosen to make this provision mandatory, that is, broadcasters, they have to devote 10% of the transmission time to independent works. Other ones are the other half, basically, have decided to keep this optional. If we look then at the exceptions, you will see France and Italy quite strikingly without a color. This is because, and we see that on the next map, they have decided to introduce financial investment obligations. Here the map is a little bit more scattered. You have various combinations. Some member states opt for mandatory financial contributions, others have left it optional, and within the options you can have it either with a quota or with levies, so there is room for fantasy. Mentioning levies, again, here you will see that this is something that goes a little bit beyond the AVMS directive. The AVMS directive 2010 did not mention this as a specific option. Nevertheless, member states have decided in certain cases to oblige broadcasters to give contributions to their film funds, so that the contribution is indirectly managed through the funds. And here you have the central part of Europe. Most of them have introduced it as a mandatory possibility. A few of them have it as an option. Moving over to the VOD services, here you see quite a funny map with many numbers. These are the rules concerning the share in the catalog. Remember 2010, there was no minimum share. Now we have 30%. But what has happened so far? Within a range between 10% and 60%, almost all European member states have introduced a sort of minimum share. Some of them have specified it with a minimum quota. Others have decided to make it mandatory without specifying it. Other ones have kept it optional in alternative to an investment obligations. And then you have always a set of more lazy member states where basically there is a general obligation copy-pasted from the directive. No surprise that this is also the situation that we see for the financial obligation. This was the second option. You remember the or set of the 2010 directive. Mandatory investment, optional in alternative with a quota or with a levy, or no general obligation or nothing. Again, you see the European map with plenty of colors. The same with levies. Here it's basically more an experiment than a rule. There are not many countries that have decided already to put in place levies obligations. And finally, to conclude, for the prominence obligations, there are some countries which have introduced it as specific obligations, other very general, as in the directive, and still 1/3 of European member states have decided to do nothing. So now it will be, of course, quite a lot of work to do for most of the member states, where so far the rules actually are very general. But now, the question is this legal response adequate with regard to the market developments? I have received from my colleagues from the market department some figures that I would like to share with you here. From this chart, you will see the growth of VOD services divided by subscription and transactional VOD. And you will see that over a time span of 7 years, between 2012 and 2018, when it comes to subscription VOD services, the growth has been of 40 times. There has been a growth also with regard to transactional VOD. It has doubled. When we talk about consumer revenue, so just to give you an idea, in 2012, SVOD was worth 123 million euros. Now we're talking about 6.8 billion euros. So it's really a huge increase in terms of revenues. This is the average growth revenues. But now the question is this really significant? The VOD pay revenues, they are quite minimal when we consider the pie. They count for only 5% of the revenues with regard to the full picture, which counts, for example, the more traditional pay TV revenues, there are still 30%, advertising counts for 28%, public funding 23%. So why is there so much interest and so much fuss into VOD when it counts for only 5%? Well, again, because the growth has been enormous. If we look at the growth by market segment, you will see that over one single year, 2016-17, it has had a growth of 34%, which is, of course, not showing any tendency to be reducing in the following years. So, to the question, is the response adequate to this? The answers can be many. I'm just coming back from the presidency conference in Helsinki, where this was one of the questions. Is 30% enough? Are these rules really stringent enough in order to compensate for this growth? Or are they just punitive when we consider the smaller ones? All this, I leave it for you. There will be certainly room for discussion for you. What is worth remembering, and here I conclude, is that there is still some time to go. There are many months to follow before the 19th of September in 2020, which is the final deadline for the implementation of these new rules. The Observatory will follow them closely. We will do an update of our audiovisual media services database, which will contain all the implementation rules of the member states, both in original language and in the English translation. So it will make it possible for you to make interactive searches by article, by country, and with exportable fact sheets you will get an idea of what is the state of the art of the implementation. And we will follow it almost real time, so we will start as soon as the member states start. So we are now doing an update and an upgrade of our software so that this database can be perfectly functioning by the time of the deadline. There will then be reporting obligations 2 years after this deadline and a first evaluation in 2026. So we will see then how the member states have responded to the demands of the European Commission. So that's all from Strasbourg now, and have a good meeting. And should you have any questions, drop me an email and I will be available together with my colleagues to answer your queries. Bye bye.